Hello, Montana. I'm Daniel Larson, and I'm running for U.S. Senate. Trying to go around and capture what Montana voters truly care about so I can represent them when I get to the United States Senate. The theme of my campaign is STOP, which stands for See the Other Perspective. I want to do this campaign different. I want it to stay small. I want it to be focused on who I am as a person. If you have anything you're concerned about, reach out. Let's have a conversation. So hi, I'm Daniel Larson. I'm running for U.S. Senate in the state of Montana. I'm here talking to a very interesting personality, Irma. So you were a small business owner in Vegas, and then your life kind of changed. You want to explain that?
Yes. Well, talking about the backlash that I received for supporting our president. Yes, I used to be the owner of a small little Mexican bistro called the El Sombrero Mexican Bistro. And my restaurant was one of the only ones, I believe, at the time that candidate Trump visited during his campaign. And unfortunately, I received a lot of backlash for it. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that your story is very similar to a lot of people that I know. So I live in a very small town. It's Stevensville, Montana. It's about 2,000 people.
Okay.
And we have it's a deep red county, deep red district. And there's a lot of Trump supporters that when they go home for, Thanksgiving or something like that, their families, they're just not getting along, so it's, I think that in the nation, we've been divided, and I would like to explore some of the issues that the community had with you for supporting, for your support of Trump. So you had mentioned that you were there talking about issues like DACA and things like that as people were protesting your restaurant.
Yeah, well, let me just begin by saying that candidate Trump at the time, he had reached out to the campaign reached out to me and said, Mr. Trump would really love to meet with Hispanic business owners and would like to have a roundtable, Q&A, to see how he could help the Hispanic community, the Latino community. And so I was one of 50 that he met with. And so there were other business owners, that were actually very much in support of the president or the candidate Trump at the time. And so, yeah, we were sitting. He came to the restaurant, and it was a very interesting experience because we had a lot of protesters outside, which I really was not expecting. And I'm a pretty politically seasoned type of person, but I just really wasn't expecting that kind of reaction. And the juxtaposition was very interesting because we had so many protesters outside, Latino protesters that were actually brought up by, very liberal organizations and whatnot. And the juxtaposition was the protesters outside. I could see them we all could see them through the window with signs, that calling us Nazis and, and just god awful names. And here we were, 50 Latino business owners inside speaking with Mr. Trump about how to make the Latino community better and what he could do to help us in that regard. And also the issue of DACA. Many of us business owners were asking him really to approach this subject, with a lot of care. And we all, expressed how we felt about it, and DACA, that whole subject is, very, it's controversial, but it's a very complex one. So we were kind of sorting out through that and, through the window. And he had just told us, do not worry, I'm going to handle that subject with a lot of heart because I really, really feel bad. I have a lot of compassion for those children that didn't come here, on their own free will. And so that's what we were discussing. At the same time, we were being called, the worst names you could possibly imagine. And you could hear the screams from outside. And to witness that was just so disturbing to me. I was almost embarrassed because I felt like, Mr. Trump is looking at me like, okay, and you guys are here advocating for these people that are calling for really your death. Honestly, that's what they were doing. And so it was just a very interesting time.
Yeah. So one of the things that you had commented, I think this was on a Fox News broadcast, is that you wish that the people would just call you and just try to hear your side of the story. So if you had to, what would you have said to them if I was a member of your community concerned? Because the president had said a few things that had stirred people up. What would you be saying?
Well, what I would say is that, look, from my perspective and from a lot of other Latinos' perspective, in terms of what Mr. Trump meant and what he actually said, we have a different point of view on that particular subject. Could he have said it better? Could he have been a little bit, more clear as to what he really meant? Well, of course, right? Looking back, hindsight is 2020. But as a person that grew up in a border town like myself, I grew up in, El Paso, Texas. My family is from there, and understanding the issues that go on, along those borders and the issues that we have, nothing that Mr. Trump at the time was saying was really all that surprising to us. And it, those of us that have lived it, that have seen it with our own two eyes, were not offended by that, because we didn't feel that he was calling, an entire group of people, us of Mexican heritage, criminals and rapists. He was calling the criminals and rapists, right? Because that's what's actually happening there. And so, but in the political landscape, look, if you're from a left-wing party, you're going to take that to your own benefit and distort it and capitalize on it, for your own political reasons. And that's what was happening. So what I would have told them is, let's just, this is a man that understands business. This is a man that understands how to create jobs. And for the Latino community, these are all really important things. I mean, at the end of the day, those are the things that are going to make a difference in your everyday life. Look what's happened. Look what he actually ended up doing with the economy. The record low unemployment within the Latino community, highest home ownership within the Latino community, numbers that we haven't seen in decades in the Latino community. So he actually performed as I had suspected he would perform.
So you saw the economic benefits far outweighing the negatives. And when you're buying a candidate, you're not necessarily buying everything he says.
Well, you don't have exactly.
You did agree with some of the criminal elements that he was trying to address with his conversation.
Yes, that is correct. And I just felt, with the Latino community, we have to have an honest conversation with ourselves, right? About what is actually happening. And those are the things that really impact the Latino community as well. When those elements come into our country, the first community really that is affected and impacted by those type of people is the Latino community, right?
Yeah. My wife is Hispanic, and so are my children. And this is something that, we talk about, because there are, different people that we know in the community that are, they've essentially been kicked out of the country. They'll jump back in. These are negative members of society.
Sure.
But I do think we missed something in the conversation, and that doesn't quite come up. And maybe this is a result of, you had talked about on the left-hand side that there's a lot of sort of a liberal agenda, I guess, in which they're creating this divisive conversation. But there's also, on the other side, on the Republican side, they're creating this conversation. You see it now that DACA is going through the Supreme Court, and there's like this big question of what's going to happen. Are we really going to see these things legislated long term?
Right.
Because there's this real battle that this will be elevated as a political conversation just to kind of perpetuate the interests, I think, of corporations and money, actually, more than anything. But
yeah, of course. I mean, obviously we have to be aware of that, like I mentioned, this is obviously a very, complex conversation.
Sure.
And in my personal opinion, I just don't believe that either party is completely correct, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
there are valid points on both sides. So, the truth is always somewhere in the middle, and we do have to, I really think it's really important for all of us to come together, and resolve this. No particular party is going to come out a winner, so to speak, in this particular subject. And I guess that's how you always know that, you've done the right thing. If neither party is completely happy, then you've
the
done
right solution probably happens.
Exactly.
And I think most of our solutions actually fall within that middle, sort of what we all share as humans. We want our communities to be safer. We want jobs. We want economic opportunities. We want employment. And but yet we talk about the issues that just strictly divide us. And I think that there's a missing piece, especially within the Hispanic community, as far as creating that dialogue of, what, do you think that Hispanics only have a home in the Democratic Party, or do you think that there's issues of faith or issues of other sort of things that make it appealing as a Republican?
Well, I obviously, being of Mexican heritage, I've been a Republican ever since the day that I could vote. My father was a Democrat, a registered Democrat, for a very long time. He was actually a union activist when he first immigrated to this country. He immigrated at the age of 35 and was just, had always been fascinated by this country, wanted to move here. The first time he visited the United States was when he was 19 years old. And he told me stories of he always dreamed of, coming to this country, immigrating to this country. And he finally did go through the process and immigrated here along with my grandparents. It's just very interesting, when by the time I became of age to vote, he had already become so disillusioned with the Democrat Party. He just felt that this is back in the 70s, the late 70s. He just felt that was just not a place for him, And so, yes, I would say that there are so many elements of our party that seem more compatible for our culture and more so than the Democrat Party, as particularly now, because the Democrat Party is going through a certain very progressive evolution, right? And so they're even becoming further and further away, even from when my father was a Democrat, from that Democrat Party. I mean, already my father felt at the time that it was becoming a little bit too progressive for him. Can you imagine? I mean, my father's no longer with us, but I can't even imagine what he would think of it now. It's just unrecognizable. So as the Democrat Party moves further and further to the left, I really do see so much more space for them to come and cross over to the Republican Party. But look what is happening right now with President Trump and the support that he has amongst Latinos from, 2016 to now. I mean, you've seen the number of support amongst Latinos rising for support of him. So that just goes to show you that I really do think that a lot of Latinos are really taking a second look at the Republican Party and hopefully finding that they're welcomed and that there is a home here for them.
Yeah. So I think that that's one of those things that people don't quite understand. And usually when the news media catches it, they're like, well, how could you possibly support this if you're a person of color or if you're a
Oh,
member of this community?
sure,
Um,
sure. Yeah, because they look at us through the lens of our ethnicity, our skin, but we are really more than just the color of our skin. We're just like everybody else that, wants to work with dignity and have a job and be able to feed our families and, those type of things. So, we're a lot more sophisticated than, many give us credit for. And we actually really do look at the policies and how they impact our communities. And as that happens, many of us do find that the Republican Party makes a lot more sense for us, and also that this president is fighting really, really hard for policies that help our community. So we find ourselves, I think, very compatible with him because of that.
yeah. So it seems like you're pretty in line with this president. Can I offer something and just see how you feel about it?
Sure.
So I am not perfectly aligned with this president. Like
Mm-hmm.
I do think that the words that you say matter.
Sure.
For example, my family being like non-white, mixed race.
Mm-hmm.
When we're in our small town,
Mm-hmm.
over the last 3 years, there's a lot more people saying things like, calling out my wife for speaking Spanish at the bank, just being rude. They call my son Juan at school. It's some
That's
of
not a
those
good thing.
things.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
No.
It's not a good thing. But some of this, some of what the president says and the base that he stirs up does enable these people to think that, because there's members of the real right wing establishment that think
Sure.
there's a race war going on,
Sure.
and that it's our time to win, and he's captain of the ship. And it's not like I agree that that's something he's intentionally doing, but certainly I do think that the words that you choose, how you lead, matters, and
Of
that would
course.
be a substantial issue.
Of course, we should always strive to, be better, do better. As I mentioned before, could he have tailored his conversation better? Of course, I really do believe that, and it is unfortunate because, he could have actually had so much more momentum had we not been distracted by all of, that rhetoric. So, that I'll have to agree with you on. But, and unfortunately, we're always going to have to deal with, ignorance and, racist people that exists, that's always existed. And, unfortunately, I just don't ever see that really going away. I mean, yes, we can always do much more to educate people on those types of things, but I don't really think that, we're ever really truly going to eliminate that. But
I think we could do better. I mean,
course.
we have to
Of
pretend
course.
that. I mean, we have to realize that we're living in a society that we get. This is not just what we're doing now; it's what we're doing in this generation, next
Of course.
generation, things after that.
Of course.
So you've been involved with looking at what's happening with. So you had wrote a couple articles about like the USMCA.
Correct.
The tax effect and the low unemployment numbers. So now when you look forward, what are the issues that you really hope, really hope that you can help with in the future?
You mean in terms of politically?
Yeah. So what would you like to see happen for your, based off of the things that you care about,
Yeah, to me, I just always believe that the economic portion is really, really primordial for our community. I think money options, economic options matter. And so as our communities become more economically empowered, they have more options to education, more access to education. And those are the two main things that are important to me that really change a generation, kind of like the way in my own family, that's what basically happened, right? Is access to money, access to education, really, really, really matters.
Stair steps to success and economic
Absolutely,
equality.
absolutely. And when I look at candidates, political candidates, listen, I'm not, I am not one that expects a candidate to be perfect. I mean, you can pretty much find flaws in all candidates for different reasons.
Yeah, if
right?
you look hard enough, everybody's,
Honestly. And so what I try to do is I try to focus on, I guess it's like, as a business owner, I look at it this way, right?
Okay.
Sometimes, and whether you agree or not, but I'm just speaking from a business owner's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the most unpolished, employee is sometimes the one who is the most effective.
Yeah.
Right. And so, while I try to, correct them and, help them, be better in terms of their messaging or whatnot, these are doers. Right. And so you just kind of have to look at the overall picture and say, okay, well, is this person going to, provide more good than bad, And so in terms of this particular president, I think how he is impacting the Latino community is so transformational. When you really do talk about the lowest unemployment rates, the highest home ownership within Latino community, those types of things are transformational, right?
Yeah.
So those are the things that matter to me. Now, would I have a sidebar with him and maybe we should tailor this. Maybe we should tailor this in a particular way. Then of course those conversations are always had.
Yeah, actually, I used to manage the ethylene plant there in Vegas.
Oh, did you? Oh my God, chocolate! That is fantastic.
So I definitely like the fact that you called out that sometimes we have employees and sometimes we have people they just need encouragement, polishing, all these other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, sometimes the ones that are the most productive are the ones that are maybe personally less polished. I've
always struggled with that person that you can't live without, but like they've got a lot of negatives.
And I'll tell you what though. I mean, I've had the opportunity to meet the president on a few occasions, and in fact, I was one of the very few small business owners that was invited to the White House in January, right after his inauguration, to sign the bill, to be a witness of the executive bill that he signed for deregulation. The deregulations of small businesses and stuff. So, I've had the opportunity to speak to him one-on-one. And I have to tell you, there's a side of this President Trump, that most people, do not know. And it is really unfortunate. One of the things that I wish is that he would be able to communicate in the way that he does with so many of us on a personal level. He's actually a very educated man, very classy man, very friendly, very compassionate. And he's always been very, very respectful to our Latino community. And there's been many of us that have had the opportunity to meet with him as a large groups. And he's been always very, very welcoming to us. And that's been always very appreciated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's good to hear. It's definitely a message that we're not quite hearing.
No, and it's unfortunate, but I think, and of course this pandemic has changed, the conversation and whatnot, and how these candidates are going to be campaigning is going to be completely different. But that is one of the things that I really wish that the campaign would focus him a little bit more on, and that is, the way that he communicates with the Latino community in the White House when he has us over, is that personality needs to be displayed more, because it's really special. Actually, he listens.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm working on a platform, and I'm trying to create a coalition, and sometimes I'm working with Democrats, and I'm trying to find more Republicans to work on it. But it's a universal basic income. Are you familiar with it?
Somewhat.
Okay, so it would be what I'm proposing is a value-added tax and a universal basic income that would be $1,000 a month for everybody as a dividend for being a citizen in the United States. And so I think that this could be transformational as far as for small businesses and empowering other people to transcend different economic disadvantages.
Well, you're talking to the wrong person. You'd be you need to talk to an economist about that. I don't know what the ramifications of something like that would be, to be honest with you, but
well, I thought I would share it with you just because.
Yeah, I'll look into it.
Well, there's a couple of other issues like it's particularly in the faith-based community, within Catholicism. I think the Pope actually advocated for it yesterday. But so like another issue is abortion, for example.
Right.
And so if 60% of the abortions in the United States are caused, or the primary reason is cited that there's, limited economic opportunities are cited for that reason, something like universal basic income would transform that question. Does that make sense? And also what you care about with being a small business owner and economic opportunities within the community, that would be a great win as well. So
yeah, the only issue that I would see, I mean, just on the surface, is just for me, anything that expands government and their involvement in our lives is like a huge negative to me. I don't see that as I don't see them usually as a solution. And the less that I want them involved in my life or anybody else's life is, so that would be, the main thing.
That would be your main drawback. But so what it would be is it's a replacement of so it would be opt-in. So you're either on a social safety net program or you're choose this universal basic income, which would actually promote some self-reliance instead of the existing welfare state. There's actually libertarian economists that are for it as well. But that's usually people's first pushback on it.
I would say just on the surface, and I would basically, if anything, I would go back to our faith and, our family in terms of, I think that a lot of these issues kind of arise from broken, as a result of broken homes, a lack of structure, of understanding of, ethics, morals, those sorts of things. And so a lot of young women find themselves in those predicaments as a result of a lot of issues in the family. And so I would go back to the family situation, because I just really don't think it's so much as economic. I mean, I look at myself as a young woman growing up, and, my parents really didn't have a lot of money at all. I mean, we could have been, I guess we would have fallen into the category of being poor, And so, you question how, and a lot of young women like myself that I grew up, how is it that, we didn't fall in that same lane and with those predicaments, as other young women. And I think it had a lot to do with, even though we were poor, we had a very, very strong family structure, where a lot of guidance and a lot of love and support and that sort of things. You just knew that, there were certain things that were just not an option. Yeah. So you just didn't really find yourself in that particular situation. So I would go back to more strengthening anything that strengthens a family.
Yeah. Well, I would just say that I think you're absolutely right. Like, it is the strength of our family structures. It is the strength of our communities. I'm just proposing it as a way to strengthen families and communities, because there are, like you had mentioned, young women, for example.
But do you think that would really strengthen a family? I mean, just the financial component? Wouldn't that just come and go?
But stress actually reduces our ability to talk to each other. So arguments over money are like one of the most common reasons that people site for like issues with their marriage. Also, you can imagine, as you were talking about young women, right? So a lot of young women are in like abusive relationships because they're tied or a dependent financial relationship on their spouse. They might be raising kids and not making their own income. This would be a recognition of the value that they're creating. You know, they would have their own essentially income because they're human, you know, and then it would allow them to transcend some of these more disruptive or destructive conversations.
You know, just on the surface, I mean, I would have to look at it a little bit closer,
Yeah,
you know, but, you know, just on the surface, that is not something that I would encourage. It doesn't seem right to me. You know, it just doesn't feel right on
its surface, but
on so many levels for so many reasons.
Let me offer you this, right? So it's cheaper than what we currently do with our monetary supply. With our monetary policy in the U.S., what we do is we encourage debt that goes to not your business, but it goes to Wall Street businesses. And then that drives our economy. What I'm saying is we can drive our economy through the people more effectively than how we drive the expansion and contraction of our money supply through Wall Street. So that's what I'm arguing for here. Even though you might be like, you might just have to sit and marinate on the issue.
I'll marinate in it. Yeah, and I'll marinate it. But so far it just that is not something that that is compatible to the things that I believe in. But
as far as individual accountability.
But I'll think about it.
But it could be a great liberator for individual accountability. What are your thoughts on the family separation policy?
The family separation policy. Well, God, this is like such a heartbreaking situation. Look, I am one of those that believes that a lot of these governments, a lot of not even so much as Latin American governments and Central American governments, but organizations, leftist organizations, did a very manipulative thing to these poor people, in that I think that they were stirred up for a leftist political agenda to put pressure on the U.S. In terms of we're talking about the caravans, right? All of the caravans.
No, I was talking about how we handled people. So Border Patrol started separating children and their parents and putting them in separate facilities.
Right. Well, there was also the situation where there was not even thought, but it was true that a lot of these children were being trafficked into this country, right? So, it's a very tough.
Trafficking is a real issue, and
it's a reality. It happens all of the time. There are very poor children that are stranded all over. I mean, I can just tell you from my experience of going to Mexico and seeing children all over the streets that are completely abandoned, and these are perfect, innocent, vulnerable targets for these traffickers, and they use those children. So, as heartbreaking as it is, I think our responsibility was to weed that out, to make sure that any child that came into this country we needed to make sure that they were being brought in by a proper adult, a proper parent. And so how else are we going to sort that out? I don't have an answer.
But that's fine. I mean, it's an elevated conversation within the discourse, and that's a lot of what people are really caring about through this administration, is the fact that policy was administered.
Yeah, also, no, I mean, that's a really tough one. I mean, it's like, you are damned if you do and damned if you don't. I mean, could you imagine if we later found out that we had thousands of children that were trafficked into this country, into, the sex slave industry and whatnot. And we just kind of just let them cross in without an issue. I mean, what would that say about us as a country? I just know.
Yeah, trafficking is an issue. Also, though, when we have asylum cases and we're making them wait in Mexico, then those populations are open up to trafficking there as well, right?
Yeah, it's a real problem. It's very complex, you know. I mean, what this administration has had to go through in terms of, I mean, just that particular subject. I mean, there's no easy solution to
So,
that.
would you think it's fair if we codify DACA and then we start working on some of these trafficking issues and maybe stop the conversation about the wall?
So you think codifying DACA would change the caravanning of folks coming in with
No, no, no,
children, or
no,
what?
no, no. It would change the immigration conversation, right? So right now it's being held up. We could just go ahead and, because a lot of people are going to expire on DACA this year, you know,
Well,
and
yeah.
they're worried.
Yeah, no, I just, you know, I have, yes, absolutely. I really think that we need to find a solution for that. I mean, that's, unfortunately, that's another political football that I see, you know, going back and forth. It's
Sure.
just, it's not to the advantage, and I'm sorry, but it's not to the advantage of the Democrat Party to find a solution for this. This is such a juicy political, tool that they, you know, use every single election cycle to make, you know, Republicans, you know, the evil ones, the bad ones, you know, the heartless ones, and that sort of a thing. So
But I think there would be the political will, especially if you said that the president, because the president has said that he's supportive of DACA. He said, "Don't worry, that we'll get this done," even if the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court question was whether the president, you know, Obama's DACA executive order actually was legal, you know.
Correct.
And so the president's in a place to actually make it a permanent solution. And then we could change the immigration conversation to one that is not so politically polarizing, right?
Yeah, correct. No, that's, listen, that is something that, well, first of all, I have to tell you, I was not a fan of when President Obama did this DACA thing. I did not agree with it. In fact, I thought that was very divisive. Okay, because if you had the opportunity, like he said, that he was going to find the immigration solution, he was going to do something about it, and they actually controlled, you know, everything, you know, the House, the Senate, and they had the presidency. They had the opportunity to do it, and they did not do it. So what was the next best thing? He came up with something like DACA. And I thought that was very divisive, because I thought, how are you going to separate? You want to talk about separation of children from their parents. That is what you have just done. You've separated the children from your parents. So what are you saying? That the children could stay here and the parents, now you're leaving them out in the cold and out in the wind to be deported? You know, families were going to be split up, and DACA is the one that did that, to be honest with you, you know? And so I wasn't a fan of DACA for that particular reason, but okay, so now we have it, and now we have these children that are now adults, you know, and they are productive citizens. And I think, you know, we have to really deal with that with a lot of compassion. I am pro helping them and finding a solution for them so they could live here, you know, with dignity. Not to say that that was the right thing to do for parents to come over with, you know, with their children and whatnot, but, you know, but okay, fine, here we are. Let's just deal with the reality of the day. And the reality of the day is that we have a lot of young adults that are productive citizens, and we should legalize them so that they don't have to live in fear. And then, yes, have a more profound conversation regarding immigration. But look what this pandemic is doing too. Now, I have a feeling this is going to change the immigration conversation as a result of, you know, everything that is happening right now. I really do.
How so?
Don't you think that perhaps, you know, having, you know, stronger controls, just not even so much as, over who enters, you know, who flows in and out of our country, you know, in terms of making sure that that they don't have an infectious disease, for example, you know, that there would be stronger controls over that. So
Well,
I have,
certainly we need some immigration policy, and we need a
correct,
system that works. And I would
correct.
say that right now, I think the biggest issue is our court system. As far
Yeah,
as, I mean, it's backlogged, it's overloaded. We're detaining people, which, that I don't think that that's appropriate too for the U.S. to pick up a detention expense when the economics of immigration, it's way better to have them in the communities working than it is to be detaining them. But I would agree with you that we need a solution, and maybe this COVID-19 is an opportunity for us to look at some of those solutions, because a quarantine protocol is similar to an immigration protocol. So.
yeah, no, and in terms of detainment, I mean, here's one of the things that I would say. The reason why people flock to this country, particularly those from Latin American countries, is because this country is so special, right? It is special because of the rule of law.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very different environment, being here in the United States. And that has to do with the fact that we do things in an orderly fashion, legal, that sort of a thing. And so I would say that to preserve this type of country and this type of an environment for future immigrants, that's why it's very, very important for us to protect the integrity of our laws.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important.
I would 100% agree. The rule of law needs to be upheld, and we need to have respect for it. And whatever laws exist, either the law is just or it's unjust, and we need to deal with that as far as with our legislative cycles, and not just politicizing these things without doing any substantive changes. Because if something's wrong, we should change it. We shouldn't just, allow exemptions for people to be lawbreakers. But we do need laws that work, and we do need to uphold them. And the difference, a lot of people need to understand that the difference between us and some of these Latin American countries is just how well our rule of law functions. And that's why we need to continually reinforce ours and help other people develop theirs. So we have been involved in Latin America and Central America, and so we have a responsibility to I think still maintain a healthy conversation with these countries to try to help them get to those places. But,
that's another reason why I actually supported this president too. I just felt that he would be, he has the personality and the business sense to be able to sit with these other Latin American, presidents and find a economic solution. One of the things that I hope comes out of this pandemic is maybe perhaps moving manufacturing closer to us, right? To Latin American countries, and mobilizing that way. And that way, these people, I mean, yes, they love the United States of America, but they love their countries more, right? And so they want to stay there.
Yeah, that would be my primary critique of the wall, for example, is if we don't have a responsible way to allow people to go back and forth, we're only going to build up the amount of illegal immigrants that we have in the United States, because a lot of people do want to go home. They want to, want to go back to.
So I witnessed two things. For example, growing up in El Paso, you have a very fluid economy between, El Paso, Texas, and Juarez, Mexico, and people flow back and forth all of the time. In fact, my aunt and my uncle used to live in Juarez, Mexico. They used to, work in El Paso. My cousins, went to school in UTEP, and they lived in Juarez. And this is a constant flow back and forth that exists still today. So, I get what you're saying, but at the same time, I have, other family members that, work for Border Patrol. And so, yes, a wall does help them out because it's a cat and mouse game all of the time. That barrier slows them down, and it helps our Border Patrol men and women, and it is helpful to them. So
I guess the issue I have is where the dollars are spent. So if we have a broken court system, and we do need resources that are put in, like Border Patrol, and we need to to get these claims processed, and we need people that have representation, because we're deporting American citizens right now. There's a lot of real travesties, and I just was thinking about where we target the money. That's
I know, but is it really about the money? Because, this government is very wealthy. We spend trillions and trillions of dollars on things that, whatever. I mean, that to me is just...
it's not whether we have the money or not. What I'm saying is we have money for infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
So, but our infrastructure should be in our courts, in our rule of law process.
I think we should have both. I think you should. I think you protect your sovereignty, and you protect your borders in areas where they're weak, and it is an issue. It is a problem. You have coyotes that flow in and out of those particular areas all the time, trafficking women and children and those sorts of things. And so, yes, you create those barriers to make it more difficult for them. Anything that will make it more difficult for them, I want. Wall, a drone, whatever,
I mean, wall, a drone, whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes.
You don't want kids trafficked across the border, neither do I. I think
and particularly, I remember when, and a lot of people don't talk about this, but do you remember all of the hundreds of women that were being raped and murdered, in the Sonora desert, and just being raped and left for dead, and that was just so horrific. And these were coyotes and sex traffickers that were dragging these women across the border and whatnot. And not much was actually said about that. That really offends me, And so why were they doing that? Because it is so easy to do. It is so porous, and it is so easy to do. So yes, anything that any barrier that we could put up to avoid any situation like that, for me, I think that's a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a totally respectable position. So I think we're both in agreement that the coyotes are doing some really terrible things to people, and people are putting their lives at risk to try to get here, and we need a better way.
It's terrible. Now you couple the coyote with somebody that would have a political agenda, and you have a recipe for disaster. And I think that's what was happening. With the caravans and all of that, I really think that the ones who really made out were the coyotes, because somebody was stirring all of this stuff up, and to the detriment of these poor people, that all they were doing was, they were looking for a better life, and an opportunity to come in whatever manner. They don't care. Listen, when you are hungry, and I always said this, listen, if I lived in Mexico and I could not feed myself nor my children, you better believe I would try to figure out a way to get myself. And there was a country right next door where I could find the solution, I would probably do the same thing, So it's very hard to judge somebody in a desperate situation like that. But, I just say, let's try to take, from our perspective, let's try to take away the advantages or the opportunities for those things to occur. But at the same time, what I want to happen is that this president, that they have an economic forum, between the Central American presidents and Mexico, and say, okay, let's think outside of the box, and let's think about economic opportunities that we can create here so that people can remain here and live with dignity and live in their own beloved countries. Let's help out that way.
Right. In these countries, they do have resources, things like that. And I think that you called it out earlier. It is the rule of law. It's the development of the rule of law in these countries.
Correct.
To help them move away from corrupt governments that underserve the needs of the people. And that's true, in Guatemala, El Salvador, Haiti, all of these countries. We just need to help them reinforce what they can have in those countries. So
yeah, no, definitely. And hey, at some point, maybe we should, explore a way to, I don't know, educate those folks that, you said that say derogatory things, to your family members, as Latinos, I feel that it is our responsibility to go out there and say, listen, we support this president for so many reasons, but you do not help this president by behaving like that and by speaking like that. And you don't represent what this country is about when you speak like that to others.
And I think if we all treated each other with just our basic humanity, and
Correct.
saw that
Correct.
that would be the solve long term.
Correct.
And so
correct.
Also, if the president's not supporting that model either, too, I think it's okay to call them out, but then say, okay, well, good job on USMCA. I mean, that's
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So promote the good things,
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, call out the bad, promote the good. Let's just keep it real here.
if it's moving things forward and people aren't dying in the desert, then it's a win.
Yes, so. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the conversation. I mean,
no, absolutely. We have to do it again sometime. So let's follow the news and let's follow the different topics and maybe opine here and there on whatever is happening.
Open invitation for you. I mean, this is good. Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, now that I have our technology figured out here, and we can find we can communicate now. So this is perfect.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
What does it mean to be a Democrat or Republican anymore? Who knows? I do know what it means to be establishment or anti-establishment, and definitely I'm anti-establishment. So keep paying attention, keep listening. We'll see if we can do this together. I'm Daniel Larson. Thanks for listening.